I'm going to have to go with Jesus on this one.
People generally assume that there were multiple authors over multiple periods of time. And the way they've concluded that is by looking at textual analysis, trying to see where there are chunks of the stories that have the same kind of style or the same reference. And people argue about that because, obviously it's difficult to recreate something ancient.
Yeah, I'll say this is Wretched Radio. That is the voice of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, psychiatry. He's from Toronto, the university. He is mega popular with evangelicals because he's smart. He's affable. He's articulate. He's able to debate extremely well. He has a catalog of statistics, and he's got a vocabulary that is massive, and it makes him so appealing, especially these days. He's talking even more and more about the Bible and about Jesus Christ. And I would love it if somebody would walk alongside this fellow and help him understand what the Bible is about, and that we don't go about the business of determining how it got put together externally. All we need to do is look internally, because the Bible itself tells us who these authors are. Dr. Peterson, he seems to be affirming JEDP, that there were 4 different authors of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, because of linguistic issues, because of the use of names for God, for different stories that they were trying to tell, a little bit about the priesthood, a little bit about morality, about the nature of God, judgment. Those are the big themes that are there that they're trying to codify by cobbling together a bunch of different sources, different narratives to form one narrative whole. Got questions. Has some things to say about the fallacy of JEDP. The most powerful argument against the theory is the Bible itself. Mark 12:26. Jordan Peterson would say there's at least 4 authors of the books of Moses. Well, that's not what Jesus said. Now, about the dead rising, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the account of the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? And incidentally, if there is one redactor, one editor of the first 5 books of the Bible because of linguistic differences, it was Moses himself. And that wasn't coming together to create a narrative that is coherent for the sake of control. No, it's a man who perhaps wrote much of the document and perhaps took writings that were already put down on whatever the material was they were using back then and said, that's right. That makes it inspired too. And nobody, incidentally, would accuse Moses of either being a plagiarist or in concocting a book from different sources. That was standard practice. Jesus himself affirms who the author of the books of Moses are. We don't need any theories. Jesus says plainly that Moses wrote the account of the burning bush. In Acts 3:22, he's commenting, there's a commentary on the passage in Deuteronomy 18:15 and credits Moses as being the author of that passage. In Romans 10:5, Paul talks about the righteousness Moses describes in Leviticus 18:5. The other was 18:15, this one's 18:5. Paul therefore testifies that Moses is the author of Leviticus. So we have Jesus identifying who the author is, that he's the fellow who put this book together. In order for the JEDP theory to be true, Jesus, Luke, and Paul must all either be liars or be in error of their understanding of the Old Testament. I'm going to have to go with Jesus on this one. And I'm going to go with Paul. They were so much closer to the sources. These theories, documentary, hypothesis, whichever one you cling to, because there are many now, or the JEDP theory, which has, again, it has been dismantled and shown to be in error. We've got to go with the ones who understood the sources because they were closer to the sources. Dr. Peterson, he needs new sources. Because he's saying, well, JDP, it's generally understood, generally accepted. Oh, no, it's not. And it's definitely not accepted in conservative circles. Now, maybe Protestant circles, certainly Jesus seminar circles, but not in more conservative Bible-based institutions.
But that's the basic idea. So it is an amalgam of viewpoints about these initial issues, and that's important to know. So it's like it's a collective story. And
that's the end of that thought. No, it's not. It's a coherent story about one subject. Jesus Christ. That's what the whole book is about, the whole thing. And that's exactly what Paul says. And that's exactly what Paul did. He preached nothing but Christ and him crucified. Now, maybe Paul was as creative and inventive as, I don't know, Andy Stanley, and he could come up with a new angle on money this week, and then we're going to do family next time, and then we're going to do marriage the third time, then we're going to do how to be a good citizen, and then we're going to go back to money, and he's got to come up with a new angle for the same subject. Now, maybe we could look at that and say that is what Paul did. He just tried to concoct as many different stories as he could about Jesus, and then he just said, perhaps a little hyperbole, that he preached nothing but Christ and him crucified. Where did he get his source material? Did he invent it? A la Andy Stanley? I don't think so. He dove into the books of Moses. He dove into the prophets. How do I know? I'm going to be preaching on this subject in a few days in Greenville, South Carolina. Oops, not South Carolina. One of the coolest cities in the country. I'm telling you that Paul reasoned with them from the scriptures. And furthermore, it specifically in the book of Acts talks about him using the laws of Moses and the prophets. He had an abundance of biblical material to preach Christ and him crucified. He didn't have to be inventive. He didn't have to retell the story. I guess I can't I'm out of material on Jesus. And if I'm not going to be found a liar by claiming I preach nothing but Christ and him crucified, I better go to a new town and weave my yarns there. Not what he did. He used the Bible to preach about Christ and him crucified and nothing else.
Okay, now, to understand the first part of Genesis, I'm going to turn, strangely enough, to something that's actually part of the New Testament, and this is a central element of Christianity. And it's a very strange idea, and it's going to take a very long time to unpack, but the idea, this is what John said about Christ. He said, in the beginning was the Word. And so that relates back to Genesis 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Three sentences like that take a lot of unpacking because, well, none of that seems to make any sense whatsoever, really, right?
It did to the original audience. They understood what logos meant. It meant wisdom. You can hear the word logic baked right into it. The original audience understood this.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was both with God, and the Word was God. So the first question might be, what in the world does that mean? In the beginning was the Word. That's the logos, actually. And the logos is embodied in the figure of Christ. So there's this idea in John that whatever Christ is, the Son of God, is not only instantiated in history, say at a particular time and place as a carpenter in some backwoods part of the world, but also something eternal that exists outside of time and space that was there right at the beginning. And as far as I can tell, what that logos represents is something like modern people. It's something like what modern people refer to when they talk about consciousness.
There it is. Awareness. That we're sentient beings.
It's something like that. It's more than that. It's like consciousness and its capacity to be aware and its capacity to communicate. It's something like that. And there's an idea underneath that, which is that being, especially from a phenomenological perspective, so the being that is experience cannot exist without consciousness. It's like consciousness shines a light on things to bring it into being.
Don't feel bad. because both Jimmy and I just blinked 3 times. The international sign for, what did he just say?
Because without consciousness, what is there? No one experiences anything. It's like, is there anything when no one experiences anything? That's the question. And
then he goes on, revealing that Dr. Peterson is more baked into 20th century secular psychology, the understanding of consciousness, and what embodies epistemology is far more instructed by Jung. I suspect Freud would be taught, maybe Rogers to boot. But it's not the way to read the Bible. We have to go back and figure out, what did that word mean to those people at that time? And maybe, just maybe, there's a commentary out there someplace that says the word means consciousness, but I'm not aware of one. This is Wretched Radio. Hey, if you would like to watch all 4 segments, not just one of Wretched Radio, you can do that at wretched.org. Good morning, heathens. I'm your teacher, Mr.